was halfway through a lukewarm Subway sandwich when the Coast Guard called. Turkey and Swiss on wheat, nothing fancy, but the Speedway on Highway 90 was the only place open at 11 p.m., and I had paperwork to finish before tomorrow's inspection. Platform Delta 7, out in the deep water past the shipping lanes. 17 safety violations from my last visit, including that corroded emergency ladder I'd flagged 6 months ago. Trinity Offshore promised it was being addressed, which in oil company speak meant they'd lost the work order. Mr. Todd. The voice was young, nervous. This is Petty Officer Martinez, Coast Guard Station Grand Isle. We need your immediate assistance with an emergency evacuation at Platform Delta 7. I set down my sandwich. Delta 7. Of course it was Delta 7. What kind of emergency? Fire? Blowout? Sir, we're not exactly sure. They broadcasted an SOS 2 hours ago, then went dark. Radio's been silent since. 2 hours. In my 15 years as a federal safety inspector, I'd learned that silence from an oil platform meant one of two things: total power failure or total disaster. Power failures you could work around. The other kind, well, that's why they kept my number on file. I know that rig, I said, crumpling the sandwich wrapper. My hands were already moving, grabbing my hard hat and safety vest from the passenger seat. 17 people on night crew. Platform manager's name is Rodriguez. Good guy, follows protocols better than most. If they went silent, something's seriously wrong. Sir, we have a cutter departing in 20 minutes. Can you meet us at the dock? I was already driving. Tell Rodriguez I'm coming. And Petty Officer, prep your medical bay. If Delta 7's been dark for 2 hours, we're going to need it. The thing is, I'd been worried about Delta 7 for months. Not just the usual corner-cutting bullshit, loose railings, expired safety equipment, that joke they called an emergency muster station. This was different. 3 weeks ago, I'd gotten calls from 2 different rig workers complaining about weird equipment installations. Stuff they weren't told about, crews coming and going at night, areas suddenly off limits with no explanation. I'd put in a formal inquiry, of course. Trinity Offshore stonewalled me with their usual corporate double talk about operational security and proprietary processes. But I'd worked enough oil rigs to know when something stank. Equipment installations that workers weren't briefed on? Night crews with no paperwork? That wasn't operational security. That was a cover-up waiting to happen. The Coast Guard cutter Steadfast was already warming engines when I arrived. 37-foot patrol boat, built for speed and rough seas. I'd been on her before during a medical evacuation last spring, grease fire that took off 2 of a welder's fingers. Good crew, but they handled search and rescue, not industrial disasters. Inspector Todd? A woman in Coast Guard blues approached, Chief Petty Officer stripes on her sleeve. I'm Chief Warrant Officer Sarah Kim. We appreciate you coming out. Just call me Danny. I hefted my inspection kit, portable gas detectors, structural assessment tools, emergency communication equipment. The stuff that might keep people alive if everything else went to hell. What's the latest from Delta 7? Kim's expression tightened. Still nothing. We've tried every frequency. Even the emergency beacon's gone silent. That stopped me cold. Emergency beacons ran on independent power systems, designed to broadcast even during complete platform shutdown. For it to go dark meant either catastrophic structural damage or someone had deliberately disabled it. Chief, how much do you know about Delta 7's recent operations? Standard drilling platform, she said, helping me aboard. Trinity Offshore's been running it for 8 years. Good safety record, no major incidents. I almost laughed. Good safety record. Trinity's definition of good meant they hadn't killed anyone yet. Chief, 3 weeks ago I flagged 17 safety violations on that platform. Corroded equipment, inadequate emergency systems, structural issues they've been ignoring for months. If something went wrong out there, really wrong, that platform's not equipped to handle it. The engines roared to life, drowning out whatever Kim said next. We pulled away from the dock into the black Gulf waters, running lights cutting through the darkness. I'd made this trip dozens of times, but tonight felt different. The radio chatter was all wrong. Too much military traffic for a civilian rescue. Call signs I didn't recognize. Chief, I said, raising my voice over the engines, what other assets are responding to this? She checked her tablet. Coast Guard helicopters en route from New Orleans. Should arrive 20 minutes after we do. That's it? No Navy support. No emergency response teams? Kim hesitated. There are other units in the area. Military exercises, they said, but they're maintaining distance to avoid interfering with our rescue operations. Military exercises, in the middle of a civilian emergency. I'd been inspecting offshore platforms long enough to know when the official story didn't add up. Military exercises didn't just happen to be running near platforms that went dark broadcasting SOS signals. My portable radio crackled, emergency frequency weak but audible. Mayday, mayday, this is Delta 7. We have. Jesus Christ, what the hell? The transmission cut to static. Rodriguez, I said. Kim looked at me questioningly. That was Carlos Rodriguez, the platform manager. I'd know his voice anywhere. She was already on the radio, trying to raise Delta 7 again. Nothing but static and the occasional burst of what sounded like automated emergency signals, the kind that activated when safety systems detected catastrophic equipment failure. I pulled out my own radio, tuned to the inspection frequency Trinity was required to monitor. Delta 7, this is Federal Inspector Todd. Rodriguez, if you can hear this, I'm inbound with the Coast Guard. What's your status? Static. Then faintly, Danny? Thank God. Something's wrong with the crew. People are sick. Really sick. Started about an hour after the night shift brought up that equipment from the dive boat. Equipment from a dive boat. Not scheduled maintenance, not regular operations. Equipment that showed up in the middle of the night, just like the workers had complained about. Rodriguez, what kind of equipment? And who authorized it? More static than military contractors. Said it was federal safety upgrade, showed proper paperwork. But Danny, the stuff they installed, it's not safety equipment. It's some kind of biological processing unit. And now the crew who handled it. The transmission dissolved into screaming. Kim was already pushing the engines harder, spray washing over the bow as we picked up speed. How far out? 12 nautical miles, she called back. 20 minutes at this speed. I was checking my equipment, running through emergency protocols in my head. Biological processing unit. Military contractors. Federal paperwork that somehow bypassed the safety inspection process I was supposed to oversee. This wasn't an industrial accident. This was something that was supposed to stay hidden, and now it was killing people I knew. My radio crackled again. Different voice this time, official military channel bleeding through on the emergency frequency. Control, this is Blackwater 6. Package deployed at target location. Recommend immediate containment protocols and cleanup authorization. Package deployed. Cleanup authorization. I grabbed Kim's arm. Chief, we need to contact your command. Now. This isn't a rescue operation, it's a cover-up. The flare was visible from 8 miles out. A massive orange tongue licking at the night sky, way bigger than Delta 7's standard burn-off. Industrial platforms didn't run flares that size unless something had gone catastrophically wrong with their gas management systems, or unless someone wanted to create a very visible beacon. That's not normal, I told Kim, pointing at the towering flame. Delta 7's flare system is rated for controlled burns only. That's an emergency blowout, probably burning off the entire reserve tank. Kim was scanning the platform through binoculars. I count maybe 6 people on the main deck. They're moving strangely. I took the binoculars. Delta 7 sat in the water like a steel island, 3 levels of drilling equipment and crew quarters balanced on massive support legs. The flare stack rose from the center, casting everything in hellish orange light. But Kim was right, the people on deck were moving wrong. Stumbling, jerky movements like they were drunk or disoriented. Rodriguez? I called on the radio. We're 2 minutes out. What's the status of your crew? Nothing but static. Then, faintly, a different voice. Stay away. Don't come aboard. Whatever you do, don't. The transmission cut off. That wasn't Rodriguez, I said. That was Jenkins, the drill operator. He's been on Delta 7 for 3 years. As we approached the platform, details became clearer. The normal deck lighting was out, leaving only the emergency floods and that massive flare casting shifting shadows across the steel decking. One of the lifeboats was missing, emergency deployment probably. But the crew quarters showed lights, which meant power was still functional. Chief, something's wrong with the approach, I said, studying the platform layout. The emergency ladder's been damaged. That's our primary boarding point. We'll have to use the service crane. Kim maneuvered the cutter toward Delta 7's crane platform. Standard approach. I'd done it dozens of times during routine inspections. But as we got closer, the smell hit us. Even over the salt spray and diesel fumes, there was something else. Sweet chemical, like industrial solvent mixed with something organic that had been sitting in the sun too long. Jesus, Kim muttered, covering her nose with her shirt. What is that? I knew that smell. I'd encountered it once before, during a rig explosion in the Bakken field. Burning chemicals mixed with other things. Things you didn't want to think about too hard. The crane operator's cab was empty, but the machinery was still functional. I'd operated platform cranes during my early years as a safety tech. Basic industrial equipment, nothing complicated. Kim maintained position while I worked the controls, lowering the personnel basket. Inspector, once we're aboard, what's the priority? Find the crew, assess whatever equipment these contractors installed, and get everyone evacuated before that flare burns through the entire gas reserve. I checked my portable gas detector, already showing elevated levels of hydrogen sulfide and some compounds I didn't recognize. Chief, we're looking at maybe 2 hours before the platform becomes uninhabitable. We stepped onto Delta 7's main deck, and immediately I knew this wasn't a standard industrial accident. The deck plating was covered in some kind of oily residue that hadn't been there during my last inspection. More concerning were the footprints, dozens of them, leading from the crew quarters toward the drilling platform in erratic, overlapping patterns. Rodriguez. I called out. It's Danny Todd. Where are you? A moan echoed from somewhere in the superstructure. Human, but wrong somehow. Like someone in tremendous pain trying to call for help. Kim had her sidearm drawn, standard Coast Guard protocol for unknown situations. Inspector, recommend we stick together and establish contact with the crew before proceeding. I was already heading toward the drilling platform, where that biological processing unit was supposed to be installed. As a federal safety inspector, it was my responsibility to assess industrial hazards, and whatever these military contractors had brought aboard was clearly the source of the problem. The equipment was set up on the lower drilling deck, connected to the main power systems with heavy-duty cables that definitely weren't standard platform wiring. It looked like some kind of filtration system, pumps, holding tanks, and processing chambers that hummed with electrical activity. But the design was all wrong for oil drilling. This was built to handle biological materials, not petroleum. Chief, look at this. I pointed to the intake pipes. This system's designed to pull material up from the ocean floor and process it through these chambers. See these biohazard symbols? Whatever they were filtering, it wasn't crude oil. Kim was studying the control panels. Everything's in military nomenclature. I can't make sense of most of these readings. That's when I noticed the holding tanks. 3 of them, each the size of a compact car, filled with some kind of dark liquid that moved independently of the platform's motion. Not sloshing like normal liquid, swirling like it was alive. Danny. Kim's voice was tight. We've got movement on the upper deck. I looked up through the grating. Silhouettes were moving around the crew quarters, but their movements were still wrong. Too slow, too jerky. And there were more of them now than we'd seen from the boat. My radio crackled. This is Rodriguez. Thank God you're here. We're barricaded in the control room. Whatever came up from those tanks, it got into people somehow. They're not right anymore. Rodriguez, it's Danny. How many crew are unaffected? 4 of us left. Jenkins, Maria Santos from the galley, Peterson from maintenance, and me. The others. Danny, they tried to bite Jenkins. Actually bite him. We had to lock them out. I was starting to understand. The biological processing equipment, the military contractors, the nighttime installation. This wasn't an industrial accident. This was some kind of field test that had gone wrong. Rodriguez, we're coming up to you. But first I need to know, what exactly did this equipment pull up from the ocean floor? Static then. Some kind of organism, I think. Like oil, but it moved on its own. The contractors said it was a new kind of biological drilling enhancement. But when it got on people's skin, the radio went dead. Above us, I could hear footsteps on the metal grating. Slow, deliberate, and getting closer. The control room was on the platform's 3rd level, accessed through a narrow stairwell that reeked of that same sweet chemical smell. Kim took point, her service weapon drawn, while I followed with my portable radio and emergency beacon. The footsteps above us had multiplied. Now it sounded like the entire night crew was moving around, but their coordination was all wrong. Too synchronized, like they were being controlled by something else. Rodriguez, I whispered into the radio. We're in the stairwell. What's your current status? Danny, thank Christ. We're sealed in the control room, but they're trying to get in. The door won't hold much longer. As we climbed, I could see through the grating to the deck below. The biological processing equipment was running at full capacity now, pumps working overtime to pull more material up from the ocean floor. But what caught my attention were the crew members moving around the machinery. They were working, operating controls, adjusting valves, but their movements were mechanical, purposeless. Like they were going through the motions of maintenance without understanding what they were doing. Chief, I said quietly, those aren't rescue victims down there. They're operating the equipment. Kim looked through the grating. Inspector, are you saying the crew is compromised? Before I could answer, my radio crackled with a different voice, military frequency, much clearer than it should be from a civilian emergency channel. Blackwater 6 to control. Biological agent has achieved expected infection rate. Recommend proceeding to Phase 2 containment. Phase 2 containment. I grabbed Kim's arm. Chief, we need to contact your command immediately. This isn't an accident, it's a military operation. What are you talking about? Those contractors didn't bring safety equipment. They brought some kind of biological weapon, and now they're planning to contain the evidence. I was thinking fast, trying to piece together what I'd observed. The platform crew are test subjects, and we just walked into the testing ground. We reached the control room level. The door was heavily reinforced, standard safety protocol for platform control centers, but I could see scratches around the handle where something had been trying to get in. Kim knocked in the Coast Guard identification pattern. Rodriguez? It's Inspector Todd and Chief Kim, Coast Guard. The door opened immediately. Carlos Rodriguez looked like he'd aged 10 years since my last inspection. Unshaven, eyes bloodshot, hands shaking as he gestured us inside. The control room was cramped with 4 people. Rodriguez, Jenkins the drill operator, Maria Santos from the galley, and Peterson from maintenance. All of them looked terrified. Danny, you have to get us off this platform, Rodriguez said immediately. Whatever those military people brought up from the ocean floor, it's changing the crew. They're not human anymore. Slow down, Carlos. Tell me exactly what happened, step by step. Rodriguez took a shaky breath. 3 weeks ago, these contractors showed up. Federal paperwork, proper authorization, looked legitimate. Said they were installing new biological safety equipment, some kind of ocean floor contamination detector. The biological processing unit on the lower deck? That's it. But Danny, they weren't detecting contamination. They were bringing it up, pumping it directly from the ocean floor into those holding tanks. Jenkins spoke up. The stuff they were bringing up, it looked like crude oil, but it moved wrong. And when it got on Tommy Briggs during the installation, he started acting strange within an hour. Strange how? Slow movements, like he was sleepwalking. Then aggressive, tried to attack anyone who got close. But the worst part was he kept working. Like his body knew how to operate the equipment, but his mind was somewhere else. I was putting together a picture that made my stomach turn. Maria, you work in the galley. Did you see how this substance affected food preparation? Water systems? Maria nodded frantically. It got into the water recycling system. Anyone who showered or drank water after midnight started showing symptoms. That's why we are still okay. We were all on day shift, left before the contamination spread. Kim was monitoring her radio, face growing pale. Inspector, I'm picking up military chatter. Multiple assets converging on our position. And they're talking about asset sanitization. Asset sanitization. Military speak for eliminating evidence. Rodriguez, do you have documentation of the contractor's visit? Work orders, authorization paperwork. Everything's in the files, he said, pointing to a computer terminal. But Danny, what does paperwork matter now? Because paperwork was evidence of criminal negligence, federal safety violations, and what sounded like an illegal bioweapons test conducted on civilian workers. But more immediately, it might contain information about how to stop whatever was happening to the crew. I accessed Rodriguez's files while Kim tried to raise Coast Guard command on her radio. The contractor documentation was thorough, too thorough for a legitimate operation. Detailed biological hazard protocols, contamination spread models, and personnel exposure limits that suggested this was always intended to be a test on human subjects. Chief, are you getting through to your command? Negative. Radio's being jammed. Kim's expression was grim. And Inspector, I've got multiple contacts approaching from the southeast. Military vessels moving fast. Through the control room windows, I could see more crew members on the deck below, all moving in that same mechanical coordination. But now they were gathering around the biological processing equipment, and the pumps were working harder than before. "They're bringing up more of it," Jenkins said, looking through the other window. "Way more than during the initial test." I checked the equipment readings on Rodriguez's monitors. The biological processing unit was operating at 300% normal capacity, and the holding tanks were nearly full. But the readouts showed something else, a timer counting down from 18 minutes. "Rodriguez, what happens when that timer reaches 0? His face went white. "Auto-discharge sequence. Whatever's in those tanks gets pumped directly into the platform's water supply and then overboard into the Gulf. Where it could spread to shipping lanes, other platforms, eventually to the Louisiana coast where millions of people lived." "Chief," I said, "we're not just witnesses to a bioweapons test. We're about to watch them deploy it." The timer read 16 minutes when Kim's radio crackled with a clear military transmission. "All civilian assets on Platform Delta 7 are to be considered compromised. Authorization granted for complete sanitization. ETA on demo charges, 12 minutes. Demo charges. They were going to blow the platform with us still on it. "Carlos, is there a way to manually shut down that biological processing unit? The main controls are on the drilling deck, but..." Rodriguez gestured toward the window. "The crew down there won't let us near it." I could see them, maybe 8 people moving around the equipment with that same mechanical coordination. Former co-workers, people Rodriguez had shared meals with for years, now operating like biological machines. "Kim, can your cutter get us off the platform if we can reach the crane?" "Not with military vessels closing in. They'll intercept us before we reach territorial waters." Kim was monitoring multiple radio frequencies. "Inspector, I count 3 fast attack craft inbound. We're trapped." Peterson, who'd been quiet until now, spoke up. "There might be another way. The emergency subsea escape pods. They're designed to get crew off the platform during blowouts." I knew about the escape pods, required safety equipment on deep water platforms. Small, pressurized vehicles that could carry 4 people to the surface from depths up to 200 feet. But Delta 7's pods hadn't been serviced in 8 months, another violation I'd flagged in my last report. "Peterson, where are the pods, and what's their current status?" "Lower level, port side. But Inspector, they haven't been tested since last spring. I wouldn't trust them in calm seas, much less in an emergency." 14 minutes on the timer. Unknown biological agent about to be discharged into the Gulf of Mexico. Military cleanup crew arriving to eliminate witnesses. And our only escape route was safety equipment I'd personally flagged as unreliable. "Rodriguez, I need you to download all the contractor documentation onto my emergency drive. Every work order, every biological reading, every piece of evidence that this was an illegal test." "Danny, what are you planning? Someone needs to survive to report this. If the military's planning to sanitize the entire operation, that documentation might be the only proof that Trinity Offshore and whoever authorized this test committed multiple federal crimes." I was already moving toward the door. "Chief, I'm going down to manually shut off that processing unit. You get everyone to the escape pods." "Inspector, those crew members down there aren't crew members anymore. They're casualties of an illegal bioweapons test, and if we don't stop that discharge sequence, there'll be a lot more casualties along the Louisiana coast." Kim checked her sidearm. "I'm coming with you." "Chief, your responsibility is to these civilian survivors. My responsibility is search and rescue, and right now, you're the asset most likely to prevent a larger disaster." She was already moving toward the door. "Besides, you'll need cover while you work on the equipment." Rodriguez handed me the data drive. "Danny, if you don't make it back, you will. All of you." I clipped the drive to my safety vest next to my emergency beacon. "Peterson, get those escape pods prepped. Assume we have 10 minutes before we need to use them." Kim and I left the control room, moving carefully down the stairwell toward the drilling deck. The sweet chemical smell was stronger now, and I could hear the biological processing equipment working harder. Pumps straining, holding tanks filling beyond capacity. Through the grating, I could see the compromised crew members still moving around the equipment, but their coordination was breaking down. Jerky movements, like whatever was controlling them was losing signal strength. Or maybe the biological agent was consuming too much of their nervous systems to maintain fine motor control. "Inspector," Kim whispered, "what exactly are we dealing with?" Is this some kind of disease? Based on what I've seen, I think it's a biological control agent. Something that takes over human nervous systems while keeping the body functional for basic tasks. I was thinking out loud, trying to process what I'd observed. Military application would be obvious: compromise enemy personnel while keeping their technical knowledge intact. We reached the drilling deck level. The compromised crew were visible through the doorway, moving between the processing units and control panels. But their movements were becoming more erratic, and 2 of them had collapsed near the holding tanks. Kim, whatever this biological agent is, I think it's consuming the host. We might be looking at a limited window before they're no longer functional. 12 minutes on the timer. I studied the equipment layout from the doorway. The main shutdown controls were on the far side of the processing unit, maybe 30 feet from our position. The compromised crew were between us and the controls, but they seemed focused on their mechanical tasks rather than security. Chief, can you create a distraction on the far side of the deck while I reach the controls? Kim nodded, moving toward the opposite entrance. Give me 30 seconds to get in position. I counted down, then moved toward the processing unit. The compromised crew members noticed me immediately, but their reactions were slow, confused. Tommy Briggs, the first one infected according to Jenkins, turned toward me with movements like he was underwater. The shutdown sequence was more complex than I'd hoped. Multiple systems had to be isolated in the correct order, or the biological agent would discharge automatically as a safety measure. Brilliant engineering for a weapons system, make it impossible to stop once deployed. Kim's distraction worked. She'd activated the emergency siren on the far side of the deck, and most of the compromised crew moved toward the sound with that same mechanical coordination. But Tommy Briggs was still approaching, and his movements were becoming more purposeful. 10 minutes on the timer. I was isolating the holding tank systems when Briggs grabbed my shoulder. His grip was impossibly strong, but his face was slack, expressionless, like looking at a puppet controlled by someone else. Kim's gunshot echoed across the deck. Briggs stumbled but didn't fall, black liquid seeping from the wound instead of blood. The biological agent had replaced his circulatory system. Inspector, how much more time do you need? 2 minutes. I was working frantically on the control systems. The shutdown sequence required manual confirmation at each step, another safeguard to prevent accidental termination. Chief, whatever happens, get to those escape pods. 8 minutes on the timer. And through the platform structure, I could hear helicopter rotors approaching fast. The shutdown worked, but not the way I'd hoped. Instead of stopping the discharge sequence, it triggered an emergency protocol that began pumping the biological agent directly overboard into the Gulf waters. Military failsafe. If the test was compromised, deploy the weapon anyway. Kim, we need to move now. The helicopters were circling the platform, searchlights cutting through the darkness. Military cleanup crew, arriving exactly on schedule. Through my radio, I could hear the chatter. Blackwater 6, target is hot. Recommend immediate asset elimination. We ran for the escape pod station, Kim covering our retreat while I activated my emergency beacon. Someone needed to know what had happened here, even if we didn't survive to testify. Peterson had managed to get one escape pod operational, barely. The electrical systems were failing, and the pressure seals hadn't been tested in months. But it was our only option with military demolition charges armed somewhere on the platform. Rodriguez, is everyone aboard? Danny, there's not enough room for 5 people in one pod. I was already outside, helping Kim secure the hatch. There is now. Get them to the surface, Carlos. Get them to safety. What about you? Someone needs to document this. I held up the data drive. And someone needs to make sure that biological agent doesn't reach the shipping lanes. The escape pod launched just as the first demolition charges detonated. Platform Delta 7 began collapsing into the Gulf, taking the biological processing equipment and whatever remained of the contaminated crew with it. But the biological agent was already in the water, spreading through the currents toward the Louisiana coast. I was still on the collapsing platform when the military helicopters closed in, but my emergency beacon was broadcasting everything. The contractor documentation, the illegal bioweapons test, the systematic cover-up of federal safety violations that had enabled this disaster. The transmission reached Coast Guard Command before the military jamming could stop it. Rodriguez and his crew reached the surface alive, with testimony that would eventually expose Trinity Offshore's involvement and the Pentagon officials who had authorized the test. 3 weeks later, sitting in a federal courthouse in New Orleans, I testified about what I'd found on platform Delta 7. The biological agent had been contained before reaching major population centers, but not before killing 17 offshore workers and contaminating 40 square miles of Gulf waters. The military contractors were never identified publicly. Trinity Offshore paid massive fines and faced criminal charges, but the executives responsible disappeared into federal witness protection. The Pentagon denied all knowledge of the bioweapons test, claiming it was a rogue operation conducted without authorization. I kept my job as a federal safety inspector, but now my reports carry more weight. When I flag safety violations, companies tend to address them quickly instead of stonewalling with corporate lawyers and bureaucratic delays. Because everyone knows what happened at Delta 7. Everyone knows that sometimes those boring safety regulations and tedious inspection reports are the only things standing between normal people and the kind of monsters that powerful institutions create when they think nobody's watching. Rodriguez still calls me every few months, checking in. He's working on a different platform now, one with a spotless safety record and management that takes federal inspections seriously. He says he sleeps better knowing that every piece of equipment on his new rig has been properly tested and documented. I still have nightmares about the compromised crew members, moving with that mechanical coordination while something else controlled their bodies. But mostly I dream about the biological agent spreading through the Gulf waters and wonder if we really contained it completely. Or if somewhere in the deep water, it's still growing, still learning, still waiting for the next test. Inspectors note, this incident remains classified under federal bioweapons security protocols. Any personnel involved in similar operations are advised to maintain complete documentation and ensure proper chain of custody for all evidence. The safety of civilian workers depends on our vigilance against institutional negligence and unauthorized biological testing.